All right, welcome everybody to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John. I'm here with Bella. We're going to be discussing Gate 26, the transit of the sun through Gate 26, Gene Key 26, and the archetype of the hypnotist. We're looking at the shadow of pride to the city of invisibility, and it's the gift of artfulness. We have the elements of mountain over heaven. And actually, in this context, I love how the ancient Chinese wisdom has an understanding of the relationships for anything. If you really think about it, how do we get a mountain up in the heavens? It doesn't really work out that way. So in this context, the relationship is within. So it is heaven within the mountain. So I'm looking forward to talking about this gene key. It's it's a very interesting one that we don't often get to see expressed in big ways amongst our society, but it is something that impacts our entire society in terms of how we understand our relationship to this seemingly all-important word that has been popping up since the early 2000s in New Age thought and spiritual circles, the idea of abundance. So Bella, share with us about the hypnotist, and what does a hypnotist have to do with abundance? What are we talking about?
I would say there's a responsibility here because if you have the ability to hypnotize people and have them remember things about the past, slightly different, maybe even of how they were, or depending on what happened, different facets or nuances of that, there is a big responsibility. And definitely, this is having a connection to the whole memory bank of a tribe or of a community, and then being able to speak in a way so that people are remembering how things were and then ready to go forward, buying into, working for. And here, like you were saying, the 45 is the programming partner. And together, the 45 being the king that has power over the resources, together with this salesman or hypnotist that actually can speak about the past connected to the 44, which is the harmonic gate, where really in the spleen we have that memory that is really connected also to our senses, how we sense the world. And so that is a very powerful connection. And with the 44 and the 26 together, any message can be transmitted and agreed upon, we could say, in the world. And here we are in the tribal circuitry. So it's definitely more in a community or even in a country, but a tribe where everybody can know each other and are working for one goal, and where the resources are within everybody in that container, we could say.
Yeah, so a lot of things that I noticed that I'd like to pick out of there. The first is that Gene Key 26 is part of the codon ring of light. And what we're talking about with light in terms of this gene key is light bending. And when we look at this archetype of the hypnotist is able to bend light in such a way that our perception of reality is heavily and deeply influenced without our awareness of the influencing intention. And that's why if you've ever seen a hypnotist do a stage act, almost every hypnotist I've ever seen as a theatrical performance, they like to play with the idea of their absolute power over the ones who are hypnotized, even though that isn't really the case of what's going on. And most hypnotists will explain at the very beginning that, none of these people up here are going to do anything that they don't really actually want to do on the inside. I can't make them do something that they don't want to do. However, the influence that the hypnotist has allows that hypnotist to compel people to do things that they normally would never do, whether that's as a result of repressive or reactive tendencies that those people may have. And that's where, when Bella says there's a big responsibility here, I believe that's what we're talking about. Because when we begin to bend light, change reality, change the nature of reality in some way, we have a responsibility of doing that for the benefit of the collective, which is where we get all of these, the connection to the 44, and when we're talking about the tribal circuitry. And it really strikes me, what really struck me about this particular gene key that I hadn't noticed before is that the dilemma is composed of lack. This idea that there isn't enough to go around. And that's partly what really speaks into the tribal nature of this gene key and this archetype, is the capability of changing what appears to be not enough as plenty for, and maybe even more than enough for everyone. And it really feels like magic when we look at it. And so I love the title of this hypnotist, because that's what we're looking at. Maybe illusions to some extent, but to the person who's hypnotized, it is the reality. And that feels like magic. So very, very fun archetype to look at and energies to play with. So Bella, what?
I just get to think, I thought about something when it comes to cars. Remember in the 40s or in the 50s when the Ford came, and it was that thing that like every family should have a Ford, every family should afford a car. And it became this thing, and maybe they had to like not buy something else. They couldn't buy a bike every year, or whatever that was, or they couldn't take the bus, or they couldn't go, I don't even know. But that became that thing that was what everybody heard. And every family that had that in the middle class really suddenly felt, oh, I'm on top of my game. We have a Ford in my family. And I wonder, fast forwarding 60 years, 70 years, and then Uber starting, and then like the same thing around. That's how you go around. And it seems like there's also always a voice that kind of says, this is the way to do it now. Of course, everybody doesn't need to have a card. We can just Uber, and then it's better for the planet. It's a better way of having our resources together as one big organism that are going around, and we can help each other. So I definitely believe that there is a voice of the 26 in each time, in each situation, that can have a lot of impact. And somehow that definitely it goes together with a 45. And I feel what you're saying too, in the low frequency, with a lot of people having the 45 and the 26, because that's either, if you have it in your activation sequence, you're going to have both, or your nodes, you're going to have both. And then you can also be locked in to that lack or poverty consciousness. And I've seen it. I have a lot of people in my life that either have those two keys, 26 and 45, together with 6 and 36, or together with, there are several crosses you can have. You can have it with a 64 and the 63, and I think there's one more cross as well. And you can see they're powerful being. There's such powerful activation sequence, and they can be in many ways they can be genius. And for some reason, that genius is not taking that step into prosperity.
Yes. One of the strangest things about the way that this energy moves through our system is, in today's society anyways, one of the things that we can often see is that this worldview of lack is actually prominently held by those with levels of hyperabundance in their experience. And we can see that in American society, in the sort of, it's almost as if our society is allergic to sharing our own things with others. When you brought up that thing about the 1940s and the 1950s, when the culture began to change, And we began to make sort of prosperity products available for the common person by the method of manufacture and just being able to distribute it in more efficient manner. It put in motion this idea of mine belongs to me, not to the community. And if we look in many communities that have a much less access to resources, communities that are actually have a great deal of lack around the world, we can find communities that behave in tribal circuit, from a tribal circuit perspective, very abundantly. They take small amounts of resources and are able to share it with everyone. And that's something that when we look at this movement of culture with Uber, we're beginning to see how this energy is beginning to transform through the individuals and then, of course, through the collective. Because now it's like, well, if I need a ride, there's Ubers everywhere. You know, like there's always availability for the things that we need. So it's just an really interesting contemplation to look at this idea of lack, and particularly if this is a gene key that is in your profile or you have a planet here, considering in what ways might we be relating with lack. And if you don't have it in your profile, this is still probably impacting you in a major way because of how important it is for the way that our economies function and the overall sort of like cultural attitude about resources and how we relate with them, use them, and share them.
And
Really
I've seen
powerful.
a few times with the 26th, I've seen this way of thinking how you get resources. Like, oh, if to have it, I have to steal it, or to have it, I have to be a trickster. Like we have this trickster energy. And I think in the animal totem, it is the, how do you say, the red animal with a tail with a white little thing on?
Oh, the fox. Uh-huh.
The fox, yeah. So the fox, it has that energy to it. And it's important too to not fixate on the trickster, because there might be a day where you can be so generous and it really doesn't matter. Like it's not gonna make you less or more rich. Probably is gonna make you more rich. But there can be this thing that gets, okay, this is the way I have to do it, even if it's not completely in integrity. So that kind of is I guess a little bit the challenge in this key. But maybe we focus a little bit more on the positives.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that the power inherent in that trickster energy, it's really noticeable when it pops up, if you're able to see it. And especially in the shadow frequencies, we see it at an incredible scale. I'd be really curious to look at it, but when Donald Trump was president in the United States, a lot of people had this deep hatred for him. And I believe that really stems from the shadow frequencies of that trickster energy that is part of the way that he's always run his businesses. He's a master of that trickster energy. And what kind of came up in the collective was like, is he using this energy for the benefit of all, or is he using this energy for the benefit of himself? And it was like this big argument in our culture. And interestingly, I kind of think that discussion may have opened the possibility that the trickster may be capable of sure enough, there he is, Donald Trump with 26.5 in his south node.
And his moon, that's his drive in the fifth line. Of course, it's going to be projected on for being that trickster. It's crazy.
My goodness, that's wild.
Oh my God.
Hilarious. So yeah, I mean, there you have it. And I believe that that discussion or argument or flat out battle that was taking place around who he is and what he stands for. I believe it may have opened a doorway for that trickster energy to begin to be used on behalf of the collective. And that power takes place through our will, which is I think that's a really interesting area to kind of bring into the discussion. Is what does our willpower usually have to do with our creative ability, and how does that change when we've harnessed the power of Gene Key 26? Because when we're looking at a world filled with generators, oftentimes if you're not following your strategy and you're trying to use your will to manifest something rather than respond to what you're magnetizing, what you run into is obstacle after obstacle and just frustration after frustration. But somehow this Gene Key 26 transforms the way that your will functions and makes it this sort of hyper powerful like gift that you can use, whether that's for yourself or for others. So Belle, I'd be curious to hear about your perspective on willpower or will, or what does this have to do with kind of the other things that this is connected with?
Yeah, this makes me think about the will center and only 30% or less having that defined, and how determination or overpromising can be dangerous for most of us because it's part of like how we actually get stuck in our not self. So I feel here that it's important to actually make a difference if you have the 26 in an open ego center, heart center, or in a defined. And I think if you have it in a defined, and I definitely see people, well, both my partner and my business partner Ashley have the 26 in a defined will, and definitely they have that thing that they work really good under pressure, and they can be kind of optimistic because they know they can make it. So the determination with the 26 in a defined will. And I have nothing in my will center. So I'm like, why are we doing this last minute? Why? We could just have done it yesterday, or we could just have done it last year. Like, for me, it's very difficult for my system to do that. But with the defined will and the 26.1, so they're also kind of loners in that sense. They have the muscle power, the willpower to go there, and they will make it. And it will often be better because it had that extra energy. It's almost like the motor of the ego kind of does this and give you more when you are using it in that kind of pressured way. Yeah, it's cool. And I mean, we were looking just now at the chart. Donald Trump, he has the 2145 channel, the money channel, and then the 26. I mean, I'm sure he has been under pressure many times, and we've seen just in the last years for different things. And it's somehow he seems to survive. He seems to thrive even under pressure somehow. And that's, yeah, very interesting. You were tapping into that. And then I wonder, like I said, with an open with an open ego and that 26, how that can work for you and maybe even against you.
I also have this one, and Bella, I'd be curious, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, but I also have 26.1. So I'm like, what is it about that energy that there's a connection there? And I that's the only defined gate for me in the ego center that I have defined, and I have the full channel to the 44 in the spleen. But that 26.1 is in my unconscious Neptune, which is kind of an interesting placement for this energy, just because of how tricksterish it is, and you know, those outer planets. Neptune has that about it to some extent, and so it feels to me, I think partly because it's unconscious, I don't have as good of a grasp on how it functions through my own system. but it has this sort of mystical quality about it for me, where there are times when I can make a decision, and then whatever that decision is, it's going to happen. And it's not like an idea that I kind of like invent. It's like an idea that sort of like rises out of somewhere, and I'm like, oh, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to happen, and here it is. It's sort of like that. But I think this is an interesting one to contemplate for the various placements of where it might be within a planet for someone, because it really to me feels like the bridge between what we might call mystical manifestation and what we call reality, which is the hard, earth element level experience of what's present. And it's that bridge between what we can see and then what is unseen and what comes into reality. And whether we do that from a standpoint of using that trickster energy, the gift is artfulness, which is an interesting one. I mean, I don't know if there's a gene key who have 3 titles of the shadow, gift, and city that sound more unrelated to each other. It's like, obviously, you can draw the lines between them, but there's a certain, you're like, artfulness, that doesn't sound like it's based in pride. Like, we think of pridefulness as this sort of like, but when they all are kind of seen in context, we start to see this sort of like possibility of that pulling the strings of reality, and whether that's a very tactile way or some kind of mystical way, it feels like the placement of this gene key can have a really large impact on how we understand this little bridge between reality and the mystical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel it's interesting here to connect the line with the key. So again, seeing Ashley work for years, and then Ray as well, how he is an artist in many ways, and they both have it in the first line. And Ashley has it in her Saturn, Ray has it in his purpose. I can definitely see the way that Ashley works, for example, with graphic design, and you give her a new program or something comes out and she just plays with it, and then this creation comes out. It's like she already knew it before. It's like in her fingers, it's in her way of just moving with things. And then with him is much more kind of the physical of how he moves through the world. And that's the first line. It has that artfulness that they're both artists in some way. And I wonder, I mean, I'm thinking about Corinda who's on the call. She has the 26 in a 6 line, and she's an artist, but it's more with a subtle. It's more in her 4-6 vision of where we're going as humanity, with that radiance in 45 and then the purpose in 26. So I definitely see that artfulness of kind of bringing people with her, and invisibly they're actually believing in that trajectory for humanity. So I wonder then, in all in between the first line and the 6th line, what happens there? What are all these ways of expressing artfulness, and how is that connected to the chakra or the element that you have in the different lines in between from the 1st to the 6th?
Yeah, for sure.
And with you too, John, there's something really physical about you. I mean, that's also kind of what we've spoken about before with your, like with the condition with diabetes, that there is like this, even that is kind of hypnotic in a way. I don't know, like there is something there's something powerful with that, and the Neptune thing too. What is it that's veiled here? This is kind of unrelated, but I was listening to Sergio this morning speaking about progressed charts in astrology, and when his progressed sun on that same day, like the same hour his progressed sun went into the 12th house, he lost almost all his hearing on one ear. And the 12th house is the things we can't hear, see, touch, beyond kind of what's human. And still now, years later, he still has that. So if speaking about the 12th house, and then Neptune kind of being the veiled thing, and there is something that's taken away from you, but in some way it actually makes your physicality more strong in a way, because you're more in tuned, because one little drop in blood sugar can change so that you're not even here anymore. Like there's something there that just I feel like I'm tapping into.
Yeah, there's a when you were speaking, what it brought up for me is the image in the old Disney movie of the Jungle Book, where the snake, the boa constrictor, I think his name is Ka. Is that right? Anyways, he's with Mowgli and he's hypnotizing Mowgli, and his eyes go all swirly, and he's just sort of like in this trance-like state. And for those who don't have an experience of this particular condition in their body, most people at some point have had the experience of having some episode of slightly low blood sugar, where you feel slightly panicky and you need to eat, and it's like, this is when people become what we call hangry. There's kind of a dip in the amount of blood sugar. Well, if it goes about 20% below that level, the brain goes into this pretty much hypnotic state where there's a line of thought happening that you have awareness of, but you have no awareness of the reality that's actually happening. There's only the line of thought that you have awareness of, and that is the totality of the reality that you have access to. And so your ability to respond to actual environmental stimuli is extraordinarily impaired. You can barely function on any level. So that's an interesting thing to bring up, and the thing about this gene key is that it has so much to do with embodiment, because it is so connected to resources and how we communicate about exchanging resources. Which, what are resources for? They're for our bodies. They have no other purpose. I mean, we can give them other purposes through art, for instance. But for the most part, even art, we have to use our bodies to experience it, even though it helps to bridge our awareness of maybe these higher qualities or frequencies of consciousness. And so when looking at this gene key, I just really like that embodiment piece is such an important aspect. And I feel as if this kind of also brings up the experience of being hypnotized in terms of how do we relate to our bodies. Again, if you've ever been hypnotized, you'll maybe have an understanding of this, although oftentimes the hypnotist will cause you to forget about your experience. I'm not sure how ethical that is, but if you've watched people, it's almost as if their body becomes a pure vehicle. They relate with their bodies as if the body is just a vehicle for the consciousness. There's no more inhibitions. There's no more restrictions around the choices that they're going to make. Now, they're not going to jump off a building. The consciousness is still going to protect the body. But it's almost as if the consciousness no longer has any identification with the body. It's just like, oh, this is my tool to play with. And I sort of wonder, when we kind of absolve this belief in lack, and we begin to understand the abundance of resources that are available and how distributing those resources in a different way can provide more than enough for everyone, if our very relationship to how we use our body and what we are using it for begins to transform in such a way that we can begin to engage with this concept of the city of invisibility, where the artfulness that we use is no longer about prideful recognition, but is about making the choice and using the tools at hand to benefit the whole. And I wonder how that would change the relationship to the body, to be almost, if it's possible, that it could become much more free, along the lines of, when somebody gets hypnotized and they're just like, oh, I'm going to act like a dog. This sounds like a fun play for my consciousness. And then your body just does all the things, and there's no thoughts getting in the way. There's no parts that are stopping you from using this magical tool that we all have access to. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Bella, but that was kind of what came up for me when you brought up that physicality of it.
Yeah, definitely. In one way, of course, it's a movement to go and buy a Ford if you were in the 50s. But what happens before we go and buy that Ford, that's the hypnotization, I believe. So often what I feel myself do is like I'm listening, I'm leaning into that 26, and it's very convincing without efforting, and that's artfulness. It's not an effort, it just speaks about that thing if it was the most evident thing in the world. So it's because it's so artful, it's so easy, you don't even question, because you don't think that somebody can speak about something that maybe isn't true or is super exaggerated in such a natural way. And that's the way it is. And that's, we were writing in the chat now, that's why sometimes it's like, I'm like, after a little while, I'm like, wait. And it's like you're saying, it's almost when I'm not in my body. It's almost when I'm just there. I'm not actually expecting to be sold to or anything. I just think we have a call about something we need to discuss. And then suddenly it's like almost like I kind of come back into my body and I'm like, wait, like my mind is being sold to. So I'm almost going to buy the Ford after this call we have or after this conversation. So it's all, I definitely agree with you, but it's more that check-in with the body where I'm like, wait, like what's going on here? And then I can see more objectively that thing, or I can feel into if it resonates. But it's also very beautiful to be in the flow. Like in that moment, I have a 16 in my chart. So in some moments with that 25, with the enthusiasm of the 16 and also the inspiration of my 61, like I feel like I can sometimes geek away with that 26 in that thing that they are speaking about. And then it's not so much about actually going and buy it. It's like the dream of what's possible. And that's where I feel like if the 26 is kind of honoring itself and honoring others and honoring the world, the way that they can inflate in a good way things so that there is movement afterwards, it's really powerful. And I'm thinking, how does it work with the 45 as the codon ring of prosperity together with the 16? And I was also thinking with the 31, that's very connected with the heart, the leadership from the heart, speaking that leadership. Like if these archetypes come together, they can really move mountains, and people are gonna, like you say, kind of have the muscle power and want to move in that direction, whether that is all coming together and playing their dogs or something else.
Yeah. It's really interesting now that we're talking about this, because it's I don't know how I completely have missed this connection before, but I spent a number of years working in sales. And I feel very grateful that this particular key is in my unconscious, because what it did for me is it served as this extraordinarily powerful check and balance, which was essentially that if I attempted to convince someone that they needed to buy something. And any aspect of my experience of lack was influencing the way that I was convincing them, they would never buy. Because it's in my body and they can feel that unease of lack coming through the expression. Now, had it been in my personality, I might have been able to hide it more than I was able to with kind of how physical I am. But it's like that placement in the design of my chart it kept me focused toward finding the alignment of the heart expression. Like what is this like authentic benefit, whether it's for you or it's for the collective, that you can choose to engage in if you resonate with it. And I've noticed that if I get into that particular flow, if I am in a process of influencing someone else, it is almost, it feels weird to me, because it's like this person is like, they almost, they're not hypnotized in any way, but they are at the same time. And it's a very kind of an odd thing to notice, and also a really cool way that it keeps like refocusing me towards what is the highest benefit for this person, and like forcing me to do that so that I can stay in my own flow. Because if I get out of flow, then everything's going to fall apart, and I've had enough experience to know that, you know. But it's such an interesting gene key because it can be used in so many different ways. And I think the different ways that we can use it is going to help the frequency to move through us and maybe expand or possibly contract as well in terms of how it comes out for whoever we're in front of. So it's like, I would love to hear, Bella, your, with everything that we've discussed, I would love to hear some of your perspective about this city and kind of what it means. We don't often spend very much time speaking about the cities, but there aren't as that many cities that speak to this aspect of the entire range of cities as this one particularly does, because it's part of the tribal circuitry, and because of how kind of personal, like pride is an extraordinarily personal thing. So we have this really individual low frequency experience, and then how does invisibility relate to the collective, and what are we looking at from that perspective? Because I feel like that's maybe just an interesting angle to add.
Yeah, so I would say invisibility in a citic sense, like all the cities, it's beyond what we can really embody, because we would dissolve if we were that. But I feel that this is a word similarly to the ninth, which is the great power of the small, right? With invincibility, that we actually can see those qualities in people in our lives more than just a glimpse. It's not just there's for example the city of being, that is just, it's not tangible. Here somehow we could say that invisibility is tangible. And I'm definitely thinking here about an instrument, like somebody who is so much in the dance or so much playing the violin, so it becomes invincible who is playing and what's the instrument. And it also looks so easy. And I actually would take that back both to my partner and to Ashley, because what they are doing again looks so easy. They are doing like 7 things at the same time, and it just is second nature. And then somehow the effort again is invincible. It's invisible. It's just happening there. And it's very convincing too. But you could definitely, there's no way in the world that somebody else could do it. It's the citic, unique thing in when it is in individualized form. I think is very, very unique. But then the invisibility in the Siddhic, well, that's when everything is unity, and that's why we dissolve in that. But that's how I have seen it, and it's again, you as you're watching that in the other, you feel like you're in a kind of flow state, and you're definitely hypnotized. Especially so when it is in something artistic, like then it's like beauty. We have here heaven and mountain, right? So that creative force is exponential, and you're like there just in the flow state of that creative spark. That is the beauty in the Siddhic frequency, like the beauty that's there. So that
that's really, I feel like that's a really insightful way to look at this particular energy. It's like the person in the activity almost dissolves into the activity. And when we watch someone who's doing that, it's totally hypnotizing and engrossing. And it's a phenomenal thing to witness. And it's I believe it's possibly one of the reasons that we have such a veneration for people who are in that state, whether it's artists, actors, sports, professional sports, people in professional sports. It's like we love to watch it. So please share with us the braid, Bella.
Yeah, so we love to appreciate their creativity, right? And we can feel the heaven's light within them that is being translated in that activity, like you're saying that you're doing. And it's not just like sparking in all direction. However, it's not like we say with the first gene key, the prime yang. It's not ejaculating all over the place like we laugh about sometimes with Ashley. It's really in this sense, artfulness is the restraint of freshness. So it is to have all that light, all that energy, the prime yang inside of you. And then you're able to move artfully with that. You're able to have that genius as it comes out in the world. And then somehow in that movement, that's the thing, there is a harmony. Like when you look at somebody who's really artful and has come to that level of mastery of genius, like there is a harmony, a stillness in the beauty of that movement. So and what we see here, Gene Key 1, heaven over heaven, and Gene Key 52, mountain over mountain. So you can see how those two energies are creating the 26.
Yeah, really, really interesting to see the restraint of freshness, and if we look at heaven over heaven as the spark, or from many, many creation stories around the world, it is the light of the world. And when we look at this gene key in terms of that codon ring of light, this is really about the capability of our cells and our DNA to gather light and to hold it. And when we see that restraint of freshness, it's like, how and when do we distribute that light? And in what way do we do it? And I really think that possibly that is the process that occurs once you kind of move from the shadow into the gift, because as long as we're living in lack, we don't have an awareness of the light that exists within. But this idea that artfulness is actually the gathering of light, and knowing when to and how to share that light with others in a way that is the most impactful, the most beneficial. And that's a really beautiful kind of understanding, I think, to engage in.
Yeah, really great. I can say last thing here about the codon ring of light, because I was just thinking about when it says restraining action until right time. And I can see with people that have a lot of those keys, so 11, 5, 26, 9, I have only the 11. I can see that sometimes I kind of butt heads with them about timing, because I feel like there should be a certain timing, like we said, maybe the last minute thing, or just in general about timing. And I feel like there is something with the coding of light and those keys, the 9 being in inertia until it's enough determination in its time, or like we see the 26 here, until the right timing. And the 5 is all about fixed rhythm. Try to move them before they're ready. Like, you're always going to lose. And I can see how sometimes I've been wrong. I could say, like, I've been trying to think that I know when the light is going to crack through, because that's what it is in the coding of light, is cracking the vessel so then more light can come through. But those processes always happen from the inside. And earlier this year, when we were in the coding of alchemy, that's also part of the alchemical process that happens on the inside and then gets translated to the world. So maybe somehow there it's my 11 being a bit idealistic in an open ashna too, of what's possible, instead of just understanding that artfulness and the movement and the cracking happens in divine timing.
Yeah, so that feels like a very relevant thing to bring up in relationship to this shadow, because we can look at some of these self-focused shadows like pride and vanity, and we can look at them and kind of say, oh, that's one of the worst things that I can be. And from that perspective, I believe is the beginning of the tendency for repression, and kind of trusting that the light that we will crack open in the right time gives us that a little bit of grace to embrace our pride in a different way, and understand that that pride may one day be able to serve the collective in an extraordinarily powerful way. So there's an enormous amount of pride embedded in artfulness, because you can't have artfulness without being proud of the expression of that art, whatever that art may be. And I think that's a really great point to bring into this one, is that patience from the 5, and looking at it from the perspective of right timing. Really, really cool. Yay. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to see the embracing of this energy going on in the chat today. Really, really great to have you with us. Even though this is one of those light gene keys about light, we're going to have an earth transmission today for the mountain that contains heaven within it. And we'll be doing that with our members here just shortly. I want to thank you all for joining us, and sending loving presence to your hearts. We'll look forward to seeing you very soon in the future. Bye for now.